Hello, true crime fanatics. Today we are going to talk about one sick individual. I believe this whole investigation was a mess, to put it nicely. He was questioned, I believe, up to 6 times and let go. You have to go where the evidence leads you, and without doubt they were sent on a wild goose chase. But one police officer in particular, this is going from memory without delving too much into it, one police officer believed it was some Geordie in South Shields because of a tape that was sent in. But this case annoys me quite a lot because they could have saved quite a lot of people, and I believe he is believed to have harmed 22 women but only convicted of 13 plus some attempted. The people in this case really, wholeheartedly, I feel so sorry for, because they were branded prostitutes when they were. The case only took a serious turn when an innocent 16-year-old girl got harmed in his path. Then people were like, whoa, you know, and I don't believe sex workers or prostitutes are any less human than the rest of the world. And yes, they put themselves in dangerous situations. Some were branded prostitutes when there was no basis for it other than they were out late at night. And yeah, it's a bungled mess. So, of course, you've probably guessed, you may have guessed, today's case is Peter Sutcliffe, aka the Yorkshire Ripper. So not only will we be talking about the case and the victims, we will be talking about what a mess the investigation was. And I'm fully aware the DNA isn't like today's. They don't go in, collect all the DNA, send that off and then investigate. It was a mess, a complete mess. But he did get caught, so. And I can tell you that because everyone probably already knows about the Yorkshire Ripper quite safely. So I have been requested a couple of times to do the Yorkshire Ripper. So here we are today. It is a very long case and I have a lot of opinions on this case. So it might be broken down into chunks, separate episodes, but all episodes will be aired in the same week. So you won't have to wait till next week to find out what happens next. Thank you so much for joining me. Grab your project, whatever you're working on. Today I will be working on Titania and Oberon. Still working on it. Yeah, so grab a project. Come join me as we discuss the sick individual that is Peter Sutcliffe, that did get his comeuppance eventually. Remember, leave your thoughts down below. I love to hear from you, and I love the interactions that are happening about my true crime. And I think his name was Chris, off the top of my head. We got into a discussion about Hanratty. He believes he's innocent. I'm not convinced, but it was interesting and I loved it. I love interacting. Angel filled me in on the recent David and Catherine Burney episode. I love it. I love interacting with you all. So let's discuss Peter Sutcliffe, aka the Yorkshire Ripper. Peter Sutcliffe was born to a working class family in Bingley, West Riding of Yorkshire, and was raised Catholic. His parents were John and Kathleen. Reportedly a loner, Peter left school at the age of 15 and had a series of menial jobs, including 2 stints as a gravedigger in the 1960s. Between November 1971 and April 1973, he worked at a television factory on a packaging line. He left this position when he was asked to go on the road as a salesman. After leaving the factory job, Peter worked night shifts at the Britannia Works of Anderton International from April 1973. In February 1975, he took redundancy and used half of the £400 payoff to train as a heavy goods vehicle driver, also known as a HGV driver. On the 5th of March 1976, Peter was dismissed for theft of used tyres. He was unemployed until October 1976, when he found a job as a HGV driver for T&WH Clark Holdings Limited on the Canal Road Industrial Estate in Bradford. Peter, by some reports, hired prostitutes as a young man, and it has been speculated that he had a bad experience during which he was conned out of money by a prostitute and her pimp. Other thoughts of his actions have not found evidence that he actually sought the services of prostitutes, but note that he nonetheless developed an obsession with them, including, quote, watching them soliciting on the streets of Leeds and Bradford. Why you'd be watching them pick up other people, I don't know. But, we're dealing with a weird person. So, throughout his childhood and his early adolescence, Peter showed no signs of abnormality. But one of his brothers admitted that their father was an abusive alcoholic, stating that their father once smashed a beer glass over Peter's head for sitting in his chair at the Christmas table. After arguing, when the brother was about 4 or 5, their father used to whip them with a belt, and later, in part related to his occupation as a gravedigger, he developed a very dark sense of humour. In his late adolescence, Peter developed a growing obsession with voyeurism. It's the sexual interest in or practice of watching other people engaged in intimate behaviours such as undressing, sexual activity, and other actions usually considered to be of a private nature. Okay, so he's a peeping Tom? Is that what they're getting at? And spent much of his time spying on prostitutes and the men seeking their services, which we had just said. Yeah, here we go. Leeds was the hot spot for Peter's activity, with 6 murders and 4 attacks in the city. Peter's first and last murders also occurred in Leeds. Now, because he was a HGV driver, he travelled through Leeds, Bradford, Manchester, Huddersfield, Halifax, Cayley and Silsden. So we have 6 murders and 4 attacks in Leeds. Bradford, he had 3 murders, 2 attacks. 2 murders in Manchester. 1 murder and 1 attack in Huddersfield. 1 murder and 1 attack in Halifax. 1 attack in Cayley and 1 attack in Silsden. Peter's 13 known murder victims were Wilma McCann in Leeds 1975, Emily Jackson in Leeds 1976, Irene Richardson in Leeds 1977, Patricia, also known as Tina Atkinson, Bradford 1977, Jane MacDonald, Leeds 1977, Jean Jordan, Manchester 1977, Yvonne Pearson in Bradford 1978, Helen Whitaker, Huddersfield in 1978, Vera Millward, Manchester 1978, Josephine Whitaker, Halifax 1979, Barbara Leach, Bradford 1979, Marguerite Walls in Leeds 1980, and Jacqueline Hill in Leeds 1980. He is also known to have attacked 10 other women. A woman of unknown name in Bradford 1969, Anna in Cayley 1975, Olive Smelt in Halifax 1975, Tracy Brown in Silsden 1975, Marcella Claxton in Leeds 1976, Maureen Long in Bradford 1977, Marilyn Moore in Leeds 1977, Anne Rooney in Leeds 1979. I can't pronounce this name. Upadaya Bandora in Leeds 1980, and Teresa Sykes in Huddersfield 1980. Marcella Claxton was 4 months pregnant when she was attacked and lost the baby she was carrying. I was reading this list and 1979 is the year I was born. So he was doing this way before I was born, and then in the early years of my life on a personal level. And it goes to show you the barbarity of this person, because I am now 42 and everyone knows who this sick individual is. We've all heard about him and what he done. It's quite sick, really. Okay, so we're going back to 1969. Peter's first documented assault was of a female prostitute whom he had met while searching for another woman who had tricked him out of money. He left his friend Trevor minivan and walked up St Paul's Road in Bradford until he was out of sight. When Peter returned, he was out of breath, as if he'd been running. He told Trevor to drive off quickly. Peter said that he followed a prostitute into a garage and hit her over the head with a stone in a sock. According to his statement, Sutcliffe said, quote, "I got out of the car, went across the road and hit her. The force of the impact tore the toe off the sock, and whatever was in it came out. I went back to the car and got in it." Police visited Peter's home the next day, as the woman he had attacked had noted Trevor's vehicle registration plate. He admitted he had hit her, but claimed it was with his hand. The police told him he was, quote, "very lucky," as the woman did not want anything more to do with the incident. She was a known prostitute and her husband was serving a jail term for assault. And there we go, that is the beginning of the landslide. He's got away with it now. So we move on to 1975. Peter committed his second assault on the night of the 5th of July in 1975 in Cayley. He attacked Anna. I can't pronounce her surname. It's like Polish. I really can't pronounce it. He attacked Anna, who was walking alone, striking her unconscious with a hammer and slashing her stomach with a knife. Disturbed by a neighbour, he left without killing her. Anna survived, and after neurological surgery, she was psychologically traumatised by the attack. She said later, quote, "I've been afraid to go out much because I feel people are staring and pointing at me. The whole thing is making my life a misery. I sometimes wish I had died in the attack." On the 15th of August, Peter attacked Olive Smelt in Halifax. Employing the same MO, he briefly engaged Olive with a commonplace pleasantry about the weather before striking hammer blows to her skull from behind. He then disarranged her clothing and slashed her lower back with a knife. Again he was interrupted and left his victim badly injured but alive. Like Anna, Olive subsequently suffered severe emotional and mental trauma. She had told interviewing officer Detective Superintendent Dick Holland, later the Ripper Squad's second in command, that her attacker had a Yorkshire accent, but this information was ignored, as was the fact that neither Olive or Anna were in towns with a red light area. So again, not prostitutes. On the 27th of August, Peter attacked 14-year-old Tracy Brown in Silsden. He struck her from behind and hit her on the head 5 times while she was walking along a country lane. He ran off when he saw the lights of a passing car, leaving his victim requiring brain surgery. Peter was not convicted of the attack but later confessed to it in 1992. This is a 14-year-old. The first victim to be killed by Peter Sutcliffe was Wilma McCann on the 30th of October. McCann, from Scott Hall in Leeds, was a mother of 4 children between the ages of 2 and 7. Peter struck the back of her skull twice with a hammer, then inflicted, quote, a stab wound to the throat, 2 stab wounds below the right breast, 3 stab wounds below the left breast, and a series of 9 stab wounds around the umbilicus. An extensive inquiry involving 150 officers of the West Yorkshire Police and 11,000 interviews failed to find the culprit. In December 2007, Wilma's oldest daughter, Sonia Newlands, died by suicide, reporting after years of suffering of anguish and depression over the circumstances of her mother's death and consequences to her and her siblings. And again, we find this with the true crime, that it impacts more than just the victim and their families. There are often suicides and tragedies that happen many years later due to the actions of one person. 1976. Peter committed his next murder in Leeds on the 20th of January 1976 when he stabbed 42-year-old Emily Jackson 52 times. In dire financial straits, Emily had been persuaded by her husband to engage in prostitution using the van of their family roofing business. Peter picked up Emily, who was soliciting outside the Gaiety pub on Roundhay Road, then drove about half a mile to some derelict building on Enfield Terrace in the Manor Industrial Estate. Peter hit her over the head with a hammer, dragged her body into a rubbish strewn yard, then used a sharpened screwdriver to stab her in the neck, chest and abdomen. He stamped on her thigh, leaving behind an impression of his boot. Peter attacked 20-year-old Marcella Claxton in Roundhay Park in Leeds on the 9th of May. Walking home from a party, she accepted an offer of a lift from Peter. When she got out of the car to urinate, he hit her from behind with a hammer. Marcella survived and testified against Peter at his trial. At the time of this attack, Marcella had been 4 months pregnant and subsequently miscarried her baby. She required multiple extensive brain operations and suffered from intermittent blackouts and chronic depression. In 1977, on the 5th of February, Peter attacked Irene Richardson, a Chapel Town prostitute in Roundhay Park. Irene was bludgeoned to death with a hammer. Once she was dead, Peter mutilated her corpse with a knife. Tyre tracks left near the murder scene resulted in a long list of possible suspect vehicles. 2 months later, on the 23rd of April, Peter killed Patricia, also known as Tina, so I will call her Tina, Atkinson, a prostitute from Bradford, in her flat, where police found a boot print on the bedclothes. 2 months after that, on the 26th of June, he murdered 16-year-old Jane MacDonald in Chapeltown. She was not a prostitute, and again they need to specify this. And in the public perception, her murder showed that all women were potential victims. The police described her as the first, quote, innocent victim. As I said in my introduction, I even did the quote marks. She wasn't the first because we had the 2 attacks on Anna and Olive, who they dismissed was not in a red light area. They ignored that, and the fact that he had a Yorkshire accent, which is important a little bit later on. Peter seriously assaulted Maureen Long in Bradford in July. He was interrupted and fled, leaving her for dead. She was suffering from hypothermia when found and was in hospital for 9 weeks. A witness misidentified the make of his car, resulting in more than 300 police officers checking thousands of cars without success. On the 1st of October 1977, Peter murdered Jean Jordan, a prostitute from Manchester. In a confession, Peter said he had realised the new £5 note he had given her was traceable. After hosting a family party at his new home, he returned to the wasteland behind Manchester's Southern Cemetery, where he had left the body, to retrieve the note. Unable to find it, he mutilated Jean's corpse and moved it. The £5 note plays a critical role later on. On the 9th of October, Jean's body was discovered by a local dairy worker and future actor Bruce Jones. who had an allotment on the land adjoining the site where the body was found, and searching for house bricks when he made the discovery. I believe Bruce Jones was in Coronation Street, wasn't he? He's Leanne Battersby's dad, if I remember correctly. The £5 note hidden in a secret compartment in her handbag was traced to branches of the Midland Bank in Shipley and Bingley. Police analysis of bank operations allowed them to narrow their field of inquiry to 8,000 employees who could have received it in their wage packet. Over 3 months, the police interviewed 5,000 men, including Peter. The police found that the alibi given for Peter's whereabouts was credible, and he had indeed spent much of the evening of the killing at a family party. Weeks of intense investigations pertaining to the origins of this £5 note led to nothing, leaving police officers frustrated that they had collected an important clue but had not been able to trace the actual firm or the employee within the firm to which or whom the note had been issued. Ding, 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 you've questioned him and let him go. On the 14th of December, Peter attacked Marilyn Moore, another prostitute from Leeds. She survived and provided police with a description of her attacker. Tyre tracks were found at the scene and matched those from an earlier attack. Her photo fit bore a strong resemblance to Peter. Like the other survivors, she provided a good description of his car, which had been seen in the red light districts. Peter had been interviewed on this issue in 1978. The police discontinued the search for the person who received the £5 note in January 1978. Although Peter was interviewed about it, he was not investigated further. He was contacted and disregarded by the Ripper squad on several further occasions. That month, Peter killed again. His victim was Yvonne Pearson, a 21-year-old prostitute from Bradford. He repeatedly bludgeoned her about the head with the hammer and jumped on her chest before stuffing horsehair into her mouth from a discarded sofa, under which he hid her body near Lum Lane. 10 days later, he killed Helen Whitaker, an 18-year-old prostitute from Huddersfield. He struck Helen on the head 5 times as she exited his vehicle, before stripping most of the clothes from her body, although her bra and polo neck jumper were positioned above her breasts. He repeatedly stabbing her in the chest. Her body was found 3 days later beneath railway arches in a timber yard to which he had driven her. Peter said of Helen, while in police custody in 1981, quote, "I had the urge to kill any woman. The urge inside me to kill girls was now practically uncontrollable." On the 16th of May, Peter killed Vera Millwood in an attack in the car park of Manchester Royal Infirmary. 1979. On the 4th of April in 1979, Peter killed Josephine Whitaker, a 19-year-old Building Society clerk, whom he had attacked on Savile Park Moor in Halifax as she was walking home. Despite forensic evidence, police efforts were diverted for several months following the receipt of the taped message claiming to be from the murderer, taunting Assistant Chief Constable George Oldfield of the West Yorkshire Police, who was leading the investigation. The tape contained a man's voice saying, quote, "I'm Jack. I see you are having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than you were 4 years ago when I started." Based on the recorded message, police began searching for a man with a Wearside accent, which linguistics narrowed down to Castletown area of Sunderland. The hoaxer, dubbed Wearside Jack, sent 2 letters to police and the Daily Mirror in March 1978, boasting of his crimes. The letters, signed Jack the Ripper, claimed responsibility for the murder of 26-year-old Joan Harrison in Preston in November 1975. At the time, police mistakenly believed that the Preston murder was not public knowledge. The hoaxer case was reopened in 2005, and DNA taken from the envelopes was entered into the national database, in which it matched that of John Samuel Humble, an unemployed alcoholic and long-time resident of the Ford estate in Sunderland, a few miles from Castletown, whose DNA was taken following a drunk and disorderly offence in 2001. On the 20th of October in 2005, John Humble was charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice for sending the hoax letters and tape. He was remanded in custody and on the 21st of March 2006 was convicted and sentenced to 8 years in prison. John Humble died on the 30th of July 2019, aged 63. Yeah. On the 1st of September, Peter murdered 20-year-old Barbara Leach, a Bradford University student. Her body was dumped at a rear of 13 Ashgrove under a pile of bricks close to the university and her lodgings. It was his 16th attack. The murder of a woman who was not a prostitute again alarmed the public and prompted an extensive publicity campaign emphasising the Wearside connection. Despite the false lead, Peter was interviewed on at least 2 other occasions in 1979, despite matching several forensic clues and being on the list of 300 names in connection with the £5 note. He was not strongly suspected. Peter was interviewed by police 9 times in total. In April 1980, Peter was arrested for drink driving. While awaiting trial, he killed 2 more women. Peter murdered 47-year-old Marguerite Wells on the night of the 20th of August 1980 and 20-year-old Jacqueline Hill, a student at Leeds University, on the night of November the 17th in 1980. Jacqueline's body was found on wasteland near the Arndale Centre. He also attacked 3 other women who survived. Upadhyaya Bandara in Leeds on the 24th of September 1980. Maureen Lee, also known as Mo, an art student, attacked in the grounds of Leeds University on the 25th of October 1980, and 16-year-old Teresa Sykes attacked in Huddersfield on the night of the 5th of November in 1980. Needing to feel safe, Teresa placed a wardrobe and dressing table against her bedroom door and slept with a knife hidden under her pillow. On the 25th of November 1980, Trevor, who had the minivan in his very first attack, an associate of Peter and the getaway driver, as Peter fled his first documented assault in 1969, reported him to the police as a suspect, but the information vanished into the paperwork already accumulated. Arrest and trial. On the 2nd of January in 1981, Peter was stopped by the police with 24-year-old prostitute Olivia Riveres in the driveway of Light Trades House in Melbourne Avenue in Sheffield. A police check by probationary constable Robert Hydes revealed Peter's car had false number plates, and he was arrested and transferred to Dewsbury Police Station. At Dewsbury, he was questioned in relation to the Yorkshire Ripper case, as he matched many of the known physical characteristics. The next day, police returned to the scene of the arrest and discovered a knife, hammer and rope, which he had discarded while he briefly slipped away from the police after telling them he was, quote, bursting for a pee. Peter hid a second knife in the toilet cistern at the police station when he was permitted to use the toilet. The police obtained a search warrant for his home in Heaton and brought his wife in for questioning. Yeah, he was married. When Peter was stripped at the police station, he was wearing an inverted V-neck sweater under his trousers. The sleeves had been pulled over his legs and the V-neck exposed his genital area. Fronts of the elbows were padded to protect his knees, as presumably he knelt over his victims' corpses. The sexual implications of this outfit were considered obvious, but it was not known to the public until published by Bilton in 2003. After 2 days of intensive questioning, on the afternoon of the 4th of January 1981, Peter suddenly declared he was the Ripper. Over the next day, he calmly described his many attacks. Weeks later, he claimed God had told him to murder the women. Quote, the women I killed were filth. Bastard prostitutes who were littering the streets. I was just cleaning up the place a bit. Peter displayed regret only when talking of his youngest murder victim, Jane MacDonald, and when questioned about the killing of Joan Harrison, he absolutely denied responsibility. Joan's murder had been linked to the Ripper killings by Wearside Jack, but in 2011 DNA evidence revealed the crime had actually been committed by convicted sex offender Christopher Smith, who had died in 2008. Peter was charged on the 5th of January 1981. At his trial, he pleaded not guilty to 13 charges of murder, but guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The basis of his defence was that he claimed to be the tool of God's will. Peter said he had heard the voices that ordered him to kill prostitutes while working as a gravedigger, which he claimed originated from the headstone of a Polish man, and the voices were that of God. Peter pleaded guilty to 7 charges of attempted murder. The prosecution intended to accept Peter's plea after 4 psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. but the trial judge, Justice Sir Leslie Boreham, demanded an unusually detailed explanation of the prosecution reasoning. After a 2-hour representation by the Attorney General, Sir Michael Havers, a 90-minute lunch break, and another 40 minutes of legal discussion, the judge rejected the diminished responsibility plea and the expert testimonies of the psychiatrists, insisting that the case should be dealt with by a jury. The trial was set to commence on the 5th of May 1981. The trial lasted 2 weeks, and despite the efforts of his counsel, James Chadwin, QC, Peter was found guilty of murder on all counts and was sentenced to 20 concurrent sentences of life imprisonment. The jury rejected the evidence of the 4 psychiatrists that Peter had paranoid schizophrenia, possibly influenced by the evidence of a prison officer who heard him say to his wife that if he convinced people that he was mad, then he might get 10 years, quote, in a loony bin. The trial judge said Peter was beyond redemption and hoped he would never leave prison. He recommended a minimum term of 30 years to be served before parole could be considered, meaning Peter would have been unlikely to be freed until at least 2011. On the 16th of July 2010, the High Court issued Peter with a whole life tariff, meaning he was never to be released. After his trial, Peter admitted another 2 attacks. It was decided that prosecution for these offences was, quote, not in the public interest. West Yorkshire Police made it clear that the victims wished to remain anonymous. Criticism of the authorities. West Yorkshire Police. West Yorkshire Police was criticised for being inadequately prepared for an investigation on this scale. It was one of the largest investigations by a British police force and predated the use of computers. Information on suspects was stored on handwritten index cards. Aside from the difficulties in storing and accessing the paperwork, the floor on the incident room was reinforced to cope with the weight of the paper. It was difficult for officers to overcome the information overload of such a large manual system. Peter was interviewed 9 times, but all information the police had about the case was stored in paper form, making cross-referencing difficult, compounded by television appeals for more information which generated thousands more documents. In 1982, Byford report into the investigation concluded, quote, the ineffectiveness of the major incident room was a serious handicap to the Ripper investigation. While it should have been the effective nerve centre of the whole police operation, the backlog of unprocessed information resulted in the failure to connect vital pieces of related information. This serious fault in the central index system allowed Peter Sutcliffe to continually slip through the net. The choice of George Oldfield to lead the inquiry was criticised by the Byford report. Quote, the temptation to appoint a new, in a quote, serious man on age or service grounds should be resisted. What is needed is an officer of sound professional competence who will inspire confidence and loyalty. he found that wanting Oldfield's focus on the hoax confession tape that seemed to indicate a perpetrator with a Wearside background, and his ignoring advice from survivors of Peter's attacks and several eminent specialists, including that from the FBI in the US, along with the dialect analysis such as Stanley Ellis and Jack Windsor Lewis, whom he had consulted throughout the manhunt, that Wearside Jack was a hoax. The investigation used it as a point of elimination rather than a line of inquiry, and allowed Peter to avoid scrutiny, as he did not fit the profile of the sender of the tapes or the letters. The Wearside Jack hoaxer was given unusual credibility when analysis of saliva on the envelopes he sent showed he had the same blood group as that of Peter he had left at the crime scenes, a type shared by only 6% of the population. The hoaxer appeared to know details of the murders which had not been released to the press, but which in fact he had acquired from pub gossip and his local newspaper. In response to the police reaction to the murders, the Leeds revolutionary feminist group organised a number of Reclaim the Night marches. The group and other feminists had criticised the police for victim blaming, especially for the suggestion that women should remain indoors at night. 11 marches in various towns across the UK took place on the 12th of November in 1977. They made the point that women should be able to walk anywhere without restriction, and they should not be blamed for the men's violence, which is exactly what they did in these days. In 1988, the mother of Peter's last victim, Jacqueline Hill, during an action for damages on behalf of her daughter's estate, argued in the case Hill versus Chief Constable of West Yorkshire in the High Court that the police had failed to use reasonable care in apprehending Peter Sutcliffe. The House of Lords held that the Chief Constable of West Yorkshire did not owe a duty of care to the victim due to the lack of proximity, and therefore failing on the second limb of the Carapo test. After Peter Sutcliffe's death in November 2020, West Yorkshire Police issued an apology for the language, tone and terminology used by the force at the time of the criminal investigation. And this is really absolutely shocking. And I know we're in 2021 now and attitudes are a little different. I still think that, I'm just going to get into this and you can form your own opinions and let me know down below, because this irritates the heck out of me. West Yorkshire Police reflected Peter Sutcliffe's own misogyny and sexist attitude, according to multiple sources. Jim Hobson, a senior West Yorkshire detective. Now, he's not meant to have biased views. I mean, you can look upon criminals as depraved or vile or sick because they are in the acts that they commit. But this takes a whole new level. They were having a press conference in October 1979, and the senior West Yorkshire detective, I'm just stressing that point out, Jim Hobson, quote, has made it clear that he hates prostitutes. Talking about Peter Sutcliffe, okay? Then he says, Many people do. We as a police force will continue to arrest prostitutes, but the Ripper is now killing innocent girls. That indicates your mental state and that you are in urgent need of medical attention. You have made your point. Give yourself up before another innocent woman dies. Like, really? Joan Smith wrote in Misogynies in 1989 and 1993, quote, "Even Sutcliffe at his trial did not go quite this far. He did at least claim he was demented at the time." Good on Joan Smith. The Attorney General, Sir Michael Havers QC, at the trial in 1981, said of Sutcliffe's victims in his opening statement, quote, "Some were prostitutes, but perhaps the saddest part of the case is that some were not. The last 6 attacks were on totally respectable women." This drew condemnation from the English collective of prostitutes who protested outside the Old Bailey. Nina Lopez, who was one of the English collective of prostitutes protesters in 1981, told The Independent 40 years later, Sir Michael's comments were, quote, "an indictment of the whole way in which the police and the establishment were dealing with the Yorkshire Ripper case." Shocking, absolutely shocking. The Byford Report. The Inspector of Constabulary Lawrence Byford's 1981 report of an official inquiry into the Ripper case was not released by the Home Office until the 1st of June in 2006. The sections, quote, "description of suspects, photo fits and other assaults," end quote, and parts of the section on Sutcliffe's, quote, "immediate associates," end quote, were not disclosed by the Home Office. Referring to the period between 1969, when Peter Sutcliffe first came to the attention of police, and in 1975, the year of the murder of Wilma McCann, the report states, quote, "There is a curious and unexplained lull in Peter Sutcliffe's criminal activities. It is my firm conclusion that between 1969 and 1980, Sutcliffe was probably responsible for many attacks on unaccompanied women, which he has not yet admitted, not only in the West Yorkshire and Manchester areas, but also in other parts of the country." In 1969, Peter described in the Byford report as a, quote, "otherwise unremarkable young man," quote, came to the notice of police on 2 occasions over incidences with prostitutes. Later that year, in September 1969, he was also arrested in Bradford's red light district for being in possession of a hammer, an offensive weapon. But he was charged with, quote, "going equipped for stealing," as it was assumed he had been a potential burglar. The report said that it was clear Sutcliffe had on at least one occasion attacked a Bradford prostitute with a club, which is also like a baton or a truncheon, a nightstick, that type of thing. The Byford report states, quote, We feel it is highly improbable that the crimes in respect of which Sutcliffe has been charged and convicted are the only ones attributable to him. This feeling is reinforced by examining the details of a number of assaults on women since 1969, which, in some ways, clearly fall into the established patterns of Sutcliffe's overall modus operandi. I hasten to add that I feel sure that the senior police officers in the areas concerned are also mindful of this possibility, but in order to ensure full account is taken of all the information available, I have arranged for an effective liaison to take place. Police identified a number of attacks which matched Peter Sutcliffe's MO and tried to question him, but he was never charged with other crimes. The Byford report's major findings were contained in a summary published by the Home Secretary William Whitaker. The first time precise details of the bungled police investigation had been disclosed. Byford described delays in following up vital tip-offs from Trevor, the minivan driver who drove him away from the very first attack. On the 25th of November 1980, Trevor sent an anonymous letter to police, in the text of which ran as follows: I have good reason to know the man you are looking for in this Ripper case. Okay, so he's not very literate. Okay. I have good reason to know the man you are looking for in the Ripper case. This man has dealings with prostitutes and always had a thing about them. His name and address is Peter Sutcliffe, 5 Garden Lane, Heaton, Bradford, Clarks, Trans, Shipley. This letter was marked, quote, priority number 1. An index card was created on the basis of the letter, and a policewoman found Peter already had 3 existing index cards in the records, but, quote, for some inexplicable reason, quote, end quote, said the Byford report, the papers remained in a filing tray in the incident room until the murderer's arrest on the 2nd of January the following year. Trevor visited Bradford Police Station the day after sending the letter to repeat his misgivings about Sutcliffe. He added that he was with Peter when he got out of the car to pursue a woman with whom he had a barroom dispute in Halifax on the 16th of August in 1975. This was the date and place of the olive smelt attack. A report compiled on the visit was lost, despite a comprehensive search that took place after Peter's arrest. According to the report, Byford said, the failure to take advantage of Trevor's anonymous letter and visit to the police station was yet again in stark illustration of the progressive decline in the overall efficiency of the major incident room. It resulted in Sutcliffe being at liberty for more than a month when he might conceivably have been in custody. Thankfully, there is no reason to think he committed any further murderous assaults within that period. He's now in custody. Following his conviction and incarceration, Peter chose to use the name Coonan, his mother's maiden name. He began his sentence at H.M. Prison Parkhurst on the 22nd of May in 1981. Despite being found sane at his trial, Peter was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Attempts to send him to a secure psychiatric unit were blocked. While at Parkhurst, he was seriously assaulted by James Costello, a 35-year-old career criminal with several convictions for violence. On the 10th of January in 1983, he followed Peter into the recess of F2, the hospital wing at Parkhurst, and he plunged a broken coffee jar twice into the left side of Peter's face, creating 4 wounds requiring 30 stitches. In March 1984, Peter was sent to Broadmoor Hospital under Section 47 of the Mental Health Act in 1983. Peter's wife. Now, we haven't covered the wife, so I just want to quickly go back to Sonia, his wife. Okay, so Peter met Sonia on the 14th of February in 1967. They married on the 10th of August 1974. Sonia suffered several miscarriages, and they were informed that she could not have children. She resumed a teacher training course, during which time she had an affair with an ice cream van driver. When Sonia completed the course in 1977 and began teaching, her and Sutcliffe used her salary to buy a house at 6 Garden Lane in Heaton in Bradford, into which they moved in on the 26th of September in 1977, where they were living at the time of his arrest. So she has been very prominent in his life, in his early life, all through the murders and everything. And I don't want to speculate that she knew or suspected or anything like that, because things do happen behind closed doors and people are oblivious. So I'm not holding any judgment on Sonia whatsoever. But I just wanted to quickly cover that because, she was a big part of his life. But Sonia obtained a separation from him around 1989 and got divorced in July 1994. On the 23rd of February 1996, he was attacked in his room at Broadmoor's Henley ward. Paul Wilson, a convicted robber, asked to borrow a videotape before attempting to strangle Peter with a cable from a pair of stereo headphones. 2 other convicted murderers, Kenneth Erskine and Jamie Devitt, intervened on hearing screams, so they saved him. After an attack with a pen by a fellow inmate, Ian Kay, on the 10th of March 1997, Peter lost vision in his left eye and his right eye was severely damaged. Ian Kay admitted to trying to kill him and was ordered to be detained in a secure mental hospital without limit of time. In 2003, it was reported that Peter had developed diabetes. He's not having a good run, is he? Peter's father died in 2004 and was cremated. On the 17th of January 2005, Peter was allowed to visit Grange-over-Sands, where his ashes had been scattered. The decision to allow the temporary release was initiated by David Blunkett and ratified by Charles Clarke when he became Home Secretary. Peter was accompanied by 4 members of the hospital staff. The visit led to front-page tabloid headlines. That would have caused outrage, I should imagine. On the 22nd of December 2007, Peter was attacked by fellow inmate Patrick Sereda, who lunged at him with a metal cutlery knife while shouting, quote, and I apologise for my language, but I'm quoting, "You fucking raping, murdering bastard, I'll blind your fucking other one," end quote. Peter flung himself backwards and the blade missed his right eye, stabbing him in the cheek. On the 17th of February 2009, it was reported that Peter was, quote, fit to leave Broadmoor. I should imagine that he may be not quite fit, but they are sick of dealing with all of this. On the 23rd of March 2010, the Secretary of State for Justice, Jack Straw, was questioned by Julie Kirkbride, Conservative Member of Parliament for Bromsgrove, in the House of Commons, seeking reassurance for a constituent, a victim of Peter Sutcliffe, that he would remain in prison. Straw responded that whilst the matter of Peter Sutcliffe's release was a parole board matter, quote, that all the evidence that I have seen on this case, and it's a great deal, suggests to me that there are no circumstances in which this man will be released. End quote. Appeal. An application by Peter for a minimum term to be set, offering the possibility of parole after that date if it were thought safe to release him, was heard by the High Court on the 16th of July 2010. The court decided that Sutcliffe would never be released. Mr. Justice Mitting stated, "This was a campaign of murder which terrorised the population of a large part of Yorkshire for several years. The only explanation for it on the jury's verdict was anger, hatred and obsession. Apart from a terrorist outrage, it is difficult to conceive of circumstances in which one man could account for so many victims." Psychological reports describing Peter Sutcliffe's mental state were taken into consideration, as was the severity of his crimes. Sutcliffe spent the rest of his life in custody. On the 4th of August 2010, a spokesman for the Judicial Communications Office confirmed that Sutcliffe had initiated an appeal against the decision. The hearing for Peter Sutcliffe's appeal against the ruling began on the 30th of November 2010 at the Court of Appeal. The appeal was rejected on the 14th of January, so like less than 2 months later. On the 9th of March 2011, the Court of Appeal rejected Sutcliffe's application for leave to appeal to the Supreme Court. So he didn't win that one, so he was going higher, and they still went, no, not having it. Later events. This is usually pretty sad, but let's see. In December 2015, Peter Sutcliffe was assessed as being, quote, no longer mentally ill. In August 2016, a medical tribunal ruled that he no longer required clinical treatment for his mental condition and could be returned to prison. Peter was reported to have been transferred from Broadmoor to HM Prison Frankland in County Durham, in August 2016. In 2017, West Yorkshire Police launched Operation Paint Hall to determine if Peter Sutcliffe was guilty of unsolved crimes dating back to 1964. This inquiry also looked at the killings of 2 prostitutes in southern Sweden in 1980. Given that Sutcliffe was a lorry driver, it was theorised that he had been to Denmark and Sweden, making use of the ferry. In December 2017, West Yorkshire Police, in response to a Freedom of Information request, neither confirmed nor denied that Operation Paint Hall existed. West Yorkshire Police later stated that it was, quote, absolutely certain that Peter Sutcliffe had never been to Sweden. Peter Sutcliffe died at the University Hospital of North Durham, aged 74, on the 13th of November 2020, after having previously returned to HMP Frankland following treatment for a suspected heart attack. At the same hospital 2 weeks prior, he had a number of underlying health problems, including diabetes, and he had refused treatment for COVID-19. A private funeral ceremony was held, and his body was cremated. I mean, I did watch in December 2020, Netflix released a 4-part documentary entitled The Ripper, and because it was called The Ripper, I assumed it was on Jack the Ripper, but it wasn't. It was on Peter Sutcliffe as the Yorkshire Ripper, and it recounts the police investigation into the murders and interviews from living victims, family members of the victims, and some police officers from that investigation. So it is worth a look, and I mean, I have no words. Seriously, this guy went on an absolute spree for years and years, and they focused on this guy from Castletown in Sunderland. They focused on him far too heavily, and I remember this in the documentary that I'm talking about. They talked about how much this investigation cost, and I mean a whole lot. They were working overtime. They were hounding. They set up in a shopping mall, and they were playing these tapes over and over again, and you could log on to the website and hear these videotapes and look at the letters, and they were looking for seeing if anyone recognised the voice or recognised the handwriting, and it was all a hoax. And it's just like, wow, you know, it's very, very tragic, and the people that survived suffered serious physical being whacked in their skulls, sorry, I know it's graphic, but their skulls were smashed in, and they were never the same ever again, and you wouldn't be, would you? And they were telling all the women to stay indoors on the night time, and they were like, why should we? And I know they're coming from a place of be safe, we're trying to keep you safe and not let you be the next victim, but I mean, you're talking the 60s and 70s, it's just not going to happen. But this is the case of Peter Sutcliffe, and I have got it into one episode for you, so I could have gone on and on about this case, and to be taken out by COVID, I mean, yeah, a part of me felt sorry for him when I was reading about all the attacks, and then you kind of remember who you're dealing with. it's tricky, isn't it? Because he didn't deserve it, but he was not a nice person, and he did a lot worse to a lot of women. And yeah, it's the whole case is very, very sad and very, very tragic. And as much as I like to talk about all these true crime murderers and everything else that they do, my heart always goes to the victims, and it's a case of remembering them as much as the person who committed these atrocious acts. And thank you for spending over an hour with me, guys. I really do appreciate it. And remember to let me know your comments down below. Did he deserve all that punishment by other prisoners? Tough one, isn't it? It is tough. But that's because we have empathy and sympathy, and these people do not. Okay, if you have any suggestions on who you would like me to talk about, please let me know in the comments section, and I will have a look into them, and I shall see you next week, guys. Thank you so much for spending time with me. I hope you've got a lot of your project done, and I shall see you very soon. Stay safe out there. Bye.